Mountain Memories, a memoir by Clara Ruth Kamer, written in January 2018, read by Amy Kamer. Howdy, my name is Amy Kamer, and welcome to the audiobook of Mountain Memories by Clara Ruth Kamer. Now, I'm not a Kamer by birth, but I was blessed to marry one of Clara's grandsons, Levi Kamer, in 2012, and I'm the proud mother of one of her great-grandsons, Roman Kamer. From the moment I met Miss Clara all these years ago, I quickly realized she is one of the most fascinating people I have ever encountered. Sitting in her squashy armchair, surrounded by photos and memorabilia of 3 generations of her descendants, what was immediately obvious about Miss Clara is that she was and remains a woman of great faith in the Lord, who has sustained her through a truly challenging life. An incredibly soft-spoken woman with a humble and gentle demeanor, Miss Clara is the kind of woman that could easily be drowned out and overlooked by a much too loud, much too distracted, and much too fast-paced world. But when I've had the joy to sit with her and listen to stories from her long life, I've always had the impression I was being afforded the rare and precious opportunity to speak with someone from truly another time, a time that is nearly lost to history, as there are few left alive who remember it firsthand. Even as Miss Clara was growing up in the 1930s, much of her family's simple way of life would have been remarkably familiar to her ancestors of 100 years past. The Lord has truly blessed us by allowing Miss Clara to write down her memories and thoughts for us so that they may live on after all of us are gone. As I read her memoir for us, I hope you will have grace for me, as I'm sure I will fumble pronunciations of names, places, and items. Remember, I'm a grafted branch into the Kamer family tree. I'm also aware the recording of this the quality of this recording is amateur, and it ought to be, for it's my maiden voyage into the world of audiobook recording. I hope my inexpert effort won't be a distraction to you. Also, if you've never read Mountain Memories for yourself, you should know something before we begin. Mountain Memories is not divided into chapters, and it isn't even a long form or even necessarily chronological narrative that tells a single story. It's exactly as Miss Clara titled it, a collection of memories, some a single sentence long. And when these memories are strung together, they paint an intricate and intimate portrait of what it was like growing up in Appalachian Virginia in the early 1930s and 40s. At the time of this recording, we will be gathering to celebrate Miss Clara's 89th birthday in 1 week. My hope and prayer is that by taking the beautiful gift Miss Clara has given us and making it into an easily accessible audiobook, that her desire to impart her memories and experiences through the writing of Mountain Memories will not be in vain. In this excerpt from Mountain Memories, Miss Clara voiced her desire for the future generations of our family. She writes, "If we aren't careful, we will let our memories die along with our parents because we did not ask them questions. Mom and Dad hardly spoke about their young days, so we lost a lot of good stories to pass on to our children and grandchildren. No, we did not have a glamorous life, full of modern technology or toys like kids of today have, but we had peace, joy, and contentment that rural people had years ago. Life was full of hardships, but we built lasting relationships that bind families together forever. Life is full of thankless jobs, and the decisions we make help us realize in our end what matters most. Yes, our memories." So, with great love, respect, honor, and gratitude to Miss Clara, I hope you enjoy this recording of Mountain Memories, flawed as it may be, as I'm sure it will be, and that its lessons capture your heart and leave the footprints upon it of a very great lady who has come before us. Memories are the things that make up our lives, maybe the eyes of our soul. My friend and I traveled to the mountains of my birth over the weekend, seeing all the quiet, empty places where there was once lots of kinfolk, family, and action stirred my kind heart. On a hill was the place, or site, of our house that was there 70 years ago, even though it's barely recognizable now with the trees and underbrush filling all the spaces, along with the surround landscape changed so much by the railroad. In my mind, it is still there, with its high timbers to support the wraparound porch full of wisteria vines to provide shade in the summer. The double fireplace was the center, to provide warmth for the family, especially for our dad, who had dug coal in the 36 inches with a pick all day. He sat in a homemade wooden chair by the fireplace to warm his back and then his wet, cold feet. That old 4-room house had many memories for us and our cousins roaming the hills, hunting for berries or mountain tea. If you go to the top of the hill, you can see the old orchard by lesser trees than the other hills. On one tree, that is the property line tree, is still visible initials of H.P. Hop Dotson, our great-grandfather. Steve Hale found them, and we were elated that they were not grown over by the years. That was probably 1860 or 1870. He was born in April 29 of 1837 and passed away March 2nd, 1923. The hills are now covered with a growth of tall timber, but the cow paths around the hills that were cleared are still in my mind. We could hear the cow bells of our cow and the relative's cow as they grazed on the hillsides and ate the grass and weeds. If they ate wild onions, the milk tasted of onions, and we did not like that. The blackberries grew large under the small bushes, and we picked them by the gallons. We saw snakes and ran as we stepped in cow piles in our bare feet. The river was close by for us to wash and rub the chiggers and sweat bee stings. Oh, what fun we had in those days. The one-room school building is now gone, but I can see it there in the small field with the girls jumping rope or playing hopscotch under the 2 pine trees. There was no grass growing there, for we wore it out as fast as it grew. The boys were having a ball game using a board similar to a bat, and the ball was made of yarn or string, and sometimes a rubber ball was used. Oh, those memories will never fade. The river was not as we swam in it in our days. It was moved because an enormous mountain of coal was discovered on Lick Fork, and a railroad had to be built to haul the coal to the coal yards. Progress provides jobs, but the change it brings alters the land and uproots people's lives. The former carefree lives for our children is over, as they are changed by modern times. The hills and the mountains are the same, with more blacktop and more side roads. We had a road in our holler for horses and sleds. The few people who had cars could not travel on it and parked along the side of the road. The Trigg curve was still as stiff as it had ever been. It was named after our Papa Trigg, who lived under the hill. In the fall, when the leaves were gone, you can get a good photo of the hillsides that was once clear and plowed by horses for the corn crops. The animals helped keep the land clear too. I've been wanting to write down some thoughts, ideas, and childhood events for years. The time never seemed right, or we don't think we have time for such things, or if anyone wants to read what I might put down on paper. I may not have events in perfect order or repeat, so just read and enjoy these words. Jeff, my son, has been an inspiration for me to do this for years. Our kids never have time to sit and listen to our stories, so I decided to try to write some ideas on paper. We didn't ask Mom or Dad so many things, and now we sisters ask why we didn't ask about their childhood or growing up years. From what Dad did say of his childhood, They were existing on barest of necessities, and I mean barely enough food, and an old house on Honey Camp that was probably not fit to live in, but could not do any better. There were so many rocks around there on the land that it would have been very hard to have a large garden to grow very much food. They had several relatives who lived nearby, and all shared friendship and probably food and shelter. Dad cared for his kinfolks and loved to visit them. Uncle Solomon Lambert was my mother's brother. Rocks filled Uncle Solly's yard, big rocks, far under the ground that were unmovable. Honey Camp was always home to Dad in his childhood. He always called his mom Mother, not Mom or Mommy, when he mentioned her in his conversations. We never heard Mom say how she met Dad, and I guess we never asked her. Times were hard with no work, especially back-breaking coal mine jobs, and that was all that was in that area. Dad worked in Welch, West Virginia, for some time in the mines. Then he went to Clinshaw and worked for many years. Many people existed on their farm and gardening and had very little money, if any. There was no assistance for widows or small children, so they had to work hard and raise gardens and depend on families to help them. There may have been a war pension or old age, but that was so small that it did not feed the veterans who could not work. Dad had cleared 3 hillsides and planted fruit trees and corn on the hill and dug a road by hand with a pick and a shovel up and around the hills to haul the corn out with a wagon and horse. The road was about 5 feet wide and very steep. My memories of this and we kids hoeing the corn are still very vivid, with the sweat bees stinging us and wiping our wet foreheads with our dress tails and our hair wringing wet. The church and the cemetery were still there, with improvements in the church. The old country preachers are modern now, but the memories of people praying and God blessing them are in my memory box. We sit and reminisce, but we like to go to the very spot of our memories where they are alive and real to us. When the heavy cares of our lives come to us as we age in years, the more we want to go home, to renew our thoughts and relive the small things, such as sitting on a large rock with cousins or building a playhouse to play in for hours on end. Our early memories of family give us a sense and purpose of life and bring us peace and comfort. It also gives us thoughts to relate to our kids, if they have or will take the time to listen to our stories of our lack of material items when we were kids. Everywhere I looked around the home place brought back a thought of our early life, such as the location of the chicken house on the big rock, or the coal house with the boys' animal skins drying on the side so they could sell and make a few cents. If we aren't careful, we will let our memories die along with our parents because we did not ask them questions. Mom and Dad hardly spoke about their young days, so we lost a lot of good stories to pass on to our children and grandchildren. No, we did not have a glamorous life full of modern technology or toys like kids of today have, but we had peace, joy, and contentment that rural people had years ago. Life was full of hardships, but we built lasting relationships that bind families together forever. Life is full of thankless jobs, and the decisions we make help us realize in the end what matters most. Yes, our memories. We moved to the house in Horseshoe in 1935 when I was a baby. They had 3 children, and I was the 4th. Elmer was born in March of 1930, Eugene in April 1931, and Lucille in 1933, and me in August 1935. It was larger, and I'm sure Mom was happier with more room. Dad dug out a large hole under the house for a cellar. He added shelves and a door to keep our food in jars from freezing. Mom canned our garden food for winter. We had potatoes and apples to store there too, and she made pickled corn and pears in large stone jars, and we snacked on an ear of pickled corn. The house was very high, and he put lattice boards from porch to ground to keep out the animals. We built playhouses under the house and entertained our cousins there, Hetty's and Olin's kids. Mom had a clothesline all around the porch to hang clothes to dry. This was very good on winter days out of the rain. There was a vine that grew all around to provide shade in the summer. It was called wisteria, with large purple pods of flowers. We had a large rock near Hetty's and a rock pile that we played on. We don't remember seeing any snakes, but it sure looks a snaky area today. Ernie and Creed. Mom and Dad started housekeeping in a 2-room little house near Hetty. They then built the 4-room house on the land Papa Trigg and Grandma Amanda gave them. Grandma had inherited the land from her mom and dad. The house had a fireplace in the middle of the living room and a wood cook stove in the kitchen. We had a front porch and around to the side. Dad found a spring above the house in the holler. He built a concrete box, and the water ran into the box and was piped into the kitchen. We had some bottom land to raise our gardens, and also on the banks beside the house. Ritter Lumber Company had a small one-land railroad near the river to haul lumber out of Horseshoe. They cut logs up the holler that went to Caney Ridge. It hauled the logs to Fremont to be shipped on trains. There was a bridge over the river below Hammond's house. There was a bridge near Papa Trigg's house over the little holler. The Ritter Company cut all the virgin timber in the county. They had a planing mill to make flooring and barrel staves in Fremont and that area. They also sawed plain boards. We played on the hillside and chewed mountain tea, a plant that grew. The boys smoked plant leaves called rabbit tobacco. That's what we called it. The boys did a lot of hunting and dried their skins or hides on the coal house and later sold them. They did lots of fishing and frog hunting. We ate the fish and the frog legs. Dad would hang the meat from the hogs under the house from the rafters for protection. The boys would have to go hunt for the cow every evening. The cow ran loose down the holler. We would keep her in the log barn Dad built overnight and turn her loose the next day. The barn was located where Lucille's house is now. Dad sold the barn to Ernie Robinson, and they moved the logs and rebuilt it down on old Joe Dotson's place that they now own. It is still in use today. It was probably built between 1930 and 1933. Dad had an orchard on the hill behind the house. He planted several apple trees and peach trees of different varieties. He had 3 hillsides cleared, and we grew corn on 2 sides. He plowed, and the boys and we girls, Lucille and I, helped hoe and pull the weeds. We thinned it and left 2 plants in each hill. We hoed it 3 times, and then we laid it by. He dug a road wide enough for a sled to be pulled by a horse all the way up the hill to the cornfield. It was about 6 to 7 feet wide. Some places were vertical, and I wonder how a horse could stand up on that spot. Dad made the sled, and it had runners and sideboards and could haul several bushels of corn or fruit. It is still there now, partly grown up, but still partly visible. Dad had a car or vehicle to drive to work. He worked in Welch, West Virginia, and later in the mines at Clincho for many years. He had to dig coal on his knees, and it was hauled out by small ponies and rail cars and track. They took their lunch and water in a large lunch bucket. They wore a miner's lamp, fueled by carbide, to have light as they worked. The roofs were supported by timbers from floor to roof. It was a very dangerous job. Mom always wanted the boys to have different jobs and not become miners. Dad may have worked in a small truck mines too. He also worked on a tunnel at Jenkins too. We went to Lick Fork School. We walked with Hetty's children and Olin's, also the Weisenhunt kids from down the holler. It was very cold in the winter. We climbed the hill in front of Papa's house and went down the highway and then up Lick Fork about half-mile. The Rifes lived at the mouth of the holler. Garland and Ada lived in a log house under the road above the Rifes. All the Robinsons and other Gentry Lane kids came out of the upper Lick Fork. The Bunch children were there too. We had a different teacher every year. Some years our attendance was probably 50 or so. We had a stove in the center, and the teacher hired some older boys to build a fire early so the room would be warm. We had a coal pile under the edge of the building. We sat on a seat with 2 or 3 kids with a desk for our papers. We made a drinking cup out of paper, or drunk from a bucket of water and a dipper. The boys got the water from a spring in the holler. One year, the school board put a cooking stove in the cloakroom, and each kid brought an item for making soup. We 4th and 5th graders peeled the potatoes and other veggies and made a pan of cornbread to eat too. Each child brought his own spoon and bowl. We did not do this every day, but occasionally. It tasted good compared to a biscuit and jelly or cornbread and milk, which we took in a syrup bucket with a lid. Sometime we cooked a pot of beans. The teacher rode the public bus and walked up the holler to teach. Our school received a box of used books, clothing, and shoes from somewhere. We were so excited, for we only had necessities and no books of our own. The teacher divided the items. I don't remember what we got, but I remember the excitement of those items. We played games: Annie over, jump rope, ball games, marbles, tag, played in the leaves, in the creek, playhouses, built furniture for our playhouses with rocks and moss on the rocks, which were our sofas and beds. We used sticks for our people. We broke sassafras branches full of leaves and pretended these were our umbrellas, for none of the kids at school had ever had an umbrella. Our only social life was with our family, and cousins, and church, and school were in a 1-mile area. We never went to Clintwood or elsewhere. My brother sold the Grit newspaper, and that was our only connection to the outside world. As we walked to school, we stopped by an old beech tree standing beside the road. It is full of initials and is standing today. It is between the stiff curve of the road called Triggs Bend and mouth of Lick Fork. We stopped there every day and looked down over the steep bank to the river. Sally Baker lived on the other side of the river with her 2 sons, Clellan and Paul. The house is a big, tall, 2-story house without a porch and had lots of windows. Our cousins, Joel and Jerry, sons of Aunt Hetty, would throw rocks down on Sally's ducks who were swimming in the river. Sally would come out of the house and yell at us. Sally was a strange woman who told people's fortunes. You had to go to her house and yell, and she would come across in a boat to get you. In the summer, the river was a little smaller and people could wade across it if it was knee-high. People would pay her with a pumpkin, a sack of potatoes, or other vegetables. Lucille, Jean, Reba, and I went to have our fortunes told. She told me I would marry a dark, black-haired man and have 3 sons. I guess it came true for me. The boys really were mean to her and would call her mean names. I don't ever remember her coming to church or visiting in the neighborhood. The place she lived on was called Combo Power's place, who may have owned it at the time. The beech tree is still standing today in 2014 and is no larger, so it must have been a fully grown tree at the time. We put our initials on it, and these are grown over today. We always stopped to rest there. Across the road, or the hillsides, was a persimmon tree. It hung over the edge of the cliff, but no one could climb to get access to it. The boys talked about it and dared each other to try, but they all knew it was too dangerous. We don't remember school closing due to bad weather, so I guess we went regardless of the weather. We had pie suppers, and each girl brought a pie, and the men and boys bid on them. They brought the sum of 10 cents to 25 cents. That was a lot of money in those days. I remember Mama making 2 custard pies for Lucille and me to take. Our teacher probably brought paper and pencils for us. Our pencils cost a penny, and we had to take care for they had to last us all year. We had fun in math races and spelling bees at school. We spelled the word correctly that someone missed, and we passed them in line. We had a winner who passed and was at the head of the line. Daddy raised sugarcane one year and had a stir-off and made molasses. People came, and our teacher, Miss Ida Cunningham, came and watched the activities. I remember her being in our house, sitting in our couch, which we had not had very long. It was made into a bed each night. We had it for years and moved it to Kentucky with us. It was called a Davenport. Lick Fork had grades 1st to 5th. We went to Darwin for the 6th grade. There were 2 buildings on the top of the hill. We rode the bus sometime, but walked a lot. The building had grades 1st through 3rd and 4th through 6th. Mrs. Colley taught the upper grades. We met a lot of our cousins there that we did not know who lived on Rock House. Also, our Uncle Moscow's kids and Derry Gentry, our cousins, were there too. We went to Clintwood for the 7th grade. The 7th grade was in an old building called the CCC Camp Building. My teacher was Kitty Powers. There must have been 50 to 70 kids in this room. This was the year 1947 or 48, when we then moved to Kentucky in May of 1948. Our house on Horseshoe was comfortable, but very cold in the winter. It had boards on it, and a small board over the connecting crack of the 2 larger boards with a tin roof. We had a smokehouse and an outhouse or toilet. There was no insulation and had wallboard of pressed cardboard. We raised our food, had chickens with a chicken house near that large rock on the hill. We had a cow, and so we had milk and butter. We kids had to help churn the milk into buttermilk and butter. We kept our milk and butter under the floor of the house to be cool. Electric was available probably in 1940, and Dad bought a refrigerator and a washing machine. We were so happy with these 2 things. Dad bought a kitchen cabinet, and I have it now. It has a flour bin that Mom used all the time. We bought meal and flour in 25-pound bags. We had hot biscuits and gravy every morning and cornbread for lunch and supper. Mom cooked pinto beans at least 2 to 3 times a week. We had potatoes every meal. We made a large crock jar of pickled corn and beans and lots of kraut. Mom canned all of the things we grew in the garden. We kids went down to Horseshoe and picked blackberries by the gallon. Hetty and Owen's family usually went with us. We came home for lunch and went back in the afternoon. The cows ran loose on the hills and kept the fields and the hills grazed down, and lots of briars grew there. Mom made blackberry pies with biscuits and berries and sugar, sometimes lots of blackberry dumplings. We were scared sometimes by people from Caney Ridge who had come down in the hollers to pick blackberries too. Mom made meal gravy and tomato gravy often. We would sneak to the cellar under the house and get an ear of pickled corn for a snack. That was so good. Mom put her corn in the jar and added a cloth on the top with a large rock to keep the corn under the salted water. We kept our potatoes in a hole with grass inside to keep them warm. We had a double blanket for each bed. It was very long that folded, and we could sleep on one side and pull the other side over us, keeping us very warm in the winter. On cold days, water would freeze in our house when temperatures were near 0. The fireplace did not keep houses very warm. A lot of heat went up the chimney. Heating stoves were much warmer. When Dad added a new kitchen onto the house, a chimney was added to the kitchen for the stove, and the old kitchen became a dining room with a chimney, and we added a heating stove, and our house was much warmer. He added a back concrete porch behind the kitchen and a smokehouse close by. All of this changed when Clinchfield decided to open the mines up Link Fork. There was a railroad to be built to haul coal, and we had to sell our place to them. We kept the hillside, but had to move. Dad bought some land from Lester and Una next to Lick Fork Church and Cemetery and decided to build a cinder block house. Papa Trigg had moved to Bad Ridge, and we moved into his house. Dad quit his job and tore down our house and used the lumber to build the new house. We moved there in the fall of 1946. We lived there until May 1948 and moved to Kentucky. Mom had Larry in November 1947. We did not have a well on the hill, but there was a spring on the highway, and we carried water every evening. The water ran out of the hill into the bucket. We filled the reservoir on the stove every evening and had a bucket of water on the table. We always caught rain for using, especially in doing laundry. We had a washing machine when we got electric in the late 30s or early 40s. We also had a Frigidaire. We called refrigeration Frigidaire forever. Dad and Mom called it Frigidaire all their lives. We made homemade ice cream often. Elmer and Eugene went to Fairfax and stayed with Jossie and Urchel and worked locally. They came home to help build the house and was about 15 or 16 years old. Elmer worked for Bill Powers at his store, and Eugene worked around home. Dad had a grist mill in the old garage in the curve that belonged to Lester. They ground corn into meal. It had a gasoline motor. They ground it every Saturday. Dad kept some meal for grinding. Elmer and Dad worked on a tunnel at Jenkins around 47 or 48. Elmer would have been 17 or 18 years old, and Dad around 46 to 47 years old. There was a small house near Papa Trigg's house. Thurston and Helen lived in it. Mom said that Papa had a little store there many years ago, and she remembered helping in the store. Papa must have been a thinker for his era, or the sons were the brains of the projects. He wanted gas lights and appliances in the house. To do so, you had to have lines or pipes ran into the house. In the yard, they had a steel tank in which they put carbide, a chemical, and water that put off a gas, which ran through the pipe into the house. They had gas lights and gas iron. This required maintenance, and Grady, Mom's brother, age 25, was taking care of it, and it exploded, and he died on July 16, 1933. He had gone and got carbide to refill it, and it wasn't the right size, and he was checking on it, and it exploded. Lester and Grady were the ones that wanted the gas instead of Papa. They must have seen or heard about it somewhere. We think Grady may have lived a few hours, but we aren't sure. Lester would have been about 28 years old. Papa buried him on the hill, and thus started the family cemetery. Malloy Slemp, husband of Hetty, Mom's sister, was the second person to be buried there in December 22, 1938, at the age of 30. He died from drinking poisoned stump water in the woods. He worked for Ritter Lumber Company. Papa Trigg gave the land by the cemetery for a church deed that dated October 3, 1938. The church was built in 1939, and the first service was in May 1939. The ladies of the church met and quilted. They set their frames up with quilts and quilted. I remember going with Mom when I was very young. I don't know if it was her quilt or if it belonged to someone else, and the women were helping each other. Mom had 6 children at this time. The building was heated with a wood stove in the center. The church had a pile of coal under the back of the church and 2 toilets outside. The church had memorial meetings, and when they began, the food was actually spread on the ground. Lucille and I thought they only had sandwiches and snack food instead of cooked dishes of meat and vegetables as we have today. Papa Trigg would try to take all us kids to church, especially prayer meetings. Joel Slimp, my cousin, said he remembered Papa taking us especially to prayer meetings. Papa would preach sometimes. Also, Ralph Wistenhunt, my Aunt Ursie's husband, would preach there some too. Rosa Bell Slimp, my Aunt Hetty's mother-in-law, was a midwife who delivered all the babies in our area. We would see her coming with her black bag. She carried her instruments in the bag. We kids did not know what was happening, for we were not in the know about things of that nature. One time, we kids went to Uncle Olin's house when Rosa was at our house. Mom's kids were all delivered at home until Thelma, and Mom had to go to the doctor and hospital at Clintwood. She just went to the hospital when Larry was born because she thought she might have a difficult birth. Larry was born after we moved to the house near the church. Mom was 41 years old. She married in June 1929. Last child was born in 1947. She had 10 children in 17 years. Mom had 3 sisters, Hetty, Ursie, and Arizona. Mom and all sisters had 10 children each. Some died at birth, but others were born healthy, and most are still living. Hetty had a set of stillborn twins, and Ursie had 1 set, twin girls. All of Mom's family, except Arizona and Thurston, are buried in the Dotson Cemetery at Lick Fork. We have a Stanley Cemetery on the hill beside Delmer Weisenhunt's home. Dad's parents and brothers are buried there. Several of Dad's relatives are buried on Honey Camp in the cemetery there. Several of Mom's relatives are buried in the Hibbett's Cemetery at Hibbett's Gap. 6 generations have lived in a quarter-mile area and in sight of each other. Hop and Polly Dotson, Trigg and Amanda, Ernie and Creed, Lucille and Joe, Steve and Kathy Hale, Bobby Joe and Adrian Hale, and children. Several acres of the land are still in the ownership of Steve Hale, Lucille's son. He owns the land, inherited by Thurston and Lester Dotson, and most owned by Creed and Ernie Stanley, with the exception of Lucille's house and surrounding land. This land was originally owned by Polly Hibbett Dotson's father, named Charlie, so that makes 7 generations. We aren't sure if he bought it when his family came from North Carolina. Hop and Polly's house was a big log house with a lean-to added on for a bedroom. The kitchen was located about 20 feet away, with a huge log walk going from the house to the kitchen. At first, the chimney was built on rock and finished with poles and mud. The roof was a pole rib roof. A windstorm came and blew the roof off completely, and Hop replaced it. The house was built by Polly's father, Charlie Hibbett, who moved to Hibbett's Gap, where he lived when he was killed by the rebels in the Civil War. This fact is copied from the book Heritage of Dickerson County. They had 11 children. The Clinchfield Railroad came up Rock House along Crane's Nest River at the Hibbert-Hamilton place. They made a cut in the hill and did not follow around the hill and take the bottomland that was used for farming. In this area is a large field, and the river curves around it like a horseshoe, and so it is named Horseshoe Bend. The railroad was built in the mid-40s. The hill across from Papa's house was sliced off, and the river moved to a new location. It creates a stiff curve now, when before it was a wind bend going toward Hetty's house and Dad's barn. This destroyed our deep hole that everyone enjoyed swimming in often. I guess the older boys and girls could swim, and we younger kids did not go in the deepest parts of the creek. We would use a straight pin and bend it and tie it on a string and pole for a fishing trip. We caught lots of fish, and the boys caught lots of frogs. This was very good for us to eat. We ate lots of rabbits and squirrels, too. The boys were good hunters, but Dad never did have any time to hunt after digging coal all day. We would have pretend church and baptize each other. One person would preach. Our older brothers would set a trap to catch the animals, using sticks to hold the homemade trapdoor open. Steve found some of the sticks under the cliffs behind Lucille's house. About 3 or 4 years ago, they were forked sticks, and Steve knew they had a purpose for being under the cliffs. Eugene said he and Elmer had used them when they were young boys. There were mulberry trees growing along the creek, and the boys would climb the tree and shake them out to fall in the water. Then we would pick them up and eat them. The animals usually ate a lot of mulberries, too. Mom set a rose bush behind the house in the 1930s. It is still growing there today. We got a sprout, and I had mine planted in the yard, but it grew so many limbs that I could not keep it under control. I finally had Keith mow it down with his bush hog. The creeks were very clean in our childhood. There were no plastic items or cans to be thrown in. No septic or toilets were near the creek, so it was very clean and crystal clear. Grandma Stanley died on January 1st, 1939, and lived near Hibbett's Gap under the hill. Grandpa Stanley then broke up housekeeping and stayed with his children. He stayed with us a lot. He always wore a mustache and was a very tall and thin man. He had stomach problems and died in our house in the bedroom. It was probably stomach cancer. He traveled to Maryland to visit Prentice. That was a long trip, and Prentice probably sent him money to travel by bus. He stayed with Aunt Pearl and Aunt Ada because they did not have large families. Aunt Pearl and her husband, Albert Gentry, moved to Grandpa's house and lived there until they moved away. Then Aunt Ada and her husband, Garland Rose, moved there until they moved away in the late 70s. Uncle Albert Gentry, Pearl's husband, had a daughter, Guthrie, who wore a built-up shoe. She still walked with a limp. She did lots of housework, for Aunt Pearl traveled and preached at different Church of God Pentecostal churches. She took a pastorate when we moved from the area. Her daughter, Daisy, went to Darwin School with us, but was not allowed to chew gum. We loved to chew gum, if we ever had some, seldomly. All of the pine trees around Grandpa's house on the hill were planted by the CCC men. Some are still standing today. Grandpa died on July 22nd, 1943, at our house. Guthrie, Uncle Albert's daughter, sold Blair products and mottos. The motto was a blue cardboard with a Bible verse on it and maybe a picture with a shiny substance. Once, Mom had painted a chair and it wasn't completely dry. Guthrie came and sat down on the chair before we could warn her, and she got paint all over her dress. Oh, Mom was so sad for her. Mom bought vanilla flavoring and sometimes a box of pie filling. Guthrie finally married after she and Aunt Pearl's family moved to Marion, Virginia. Daisy still lives in Marion, near Aunt Pearl's house. Uncle Moscow had a Pentecostal church in the hill next to his house, where Delmer Weisenhunt lives at the present. He and Aunt Edna had 14 or 15 children. Older children, most usually, went away to work and would send money to help the family. Their oldest was Blanche and May, who were both older than Elmer. We did not visit them very much, if ever. We did not go to the Pentecostal church. Dad was a Free Will Baptist. He was ordained to preach in those churches. The only time we ever went shopping was when there was 5 kids. We went to Clinchow's store that could have belonged to Clinchow, the company store. They took the money out of Dad's check. I thought that was out of this world to see a store with lots of clothing. The boys got jackets, Lucille a coat, and a snowsuit for me because they did not have a coat. Mom didn't hardly have any clothing, just barely a decent dress and an old coat. That day, she bought an aqua-colored scarf that fit her head and the long ends wrapped around her head. It was soft wool and very pretty. Lucille wore it to school one day when she was in the 8th grade. It was stolen, but after investigation, it was returned to her. It was about 5 or 6 years old, but in good condition. Mom didn't go very often to wear it. It must have been the latest style, and that was called a fascinator. We don't know what happened to it over the years. That was the only luxury item Mom ever had in her life. We also had a small picture made that day. They were about 1.5 to 2 inches wide. This was our first photo in our life. We had 2 more made when I was about 5 years old or less. There was one of we kids, and my underwear is hanging down, so embarrassing. Another one is of all 7 kids and Mom and Dad. Mom made our dresses and underwear out of feed sacks. The food for our cow came in flowered sacks. Some were white or ecru with letters and company printing on them. We made our sheets and pillowcases out of them, also dish towels. I remember getting one dress from the store, which was a small blue striped dress. I got another pink one when I graduated from 8th grade. I got another pink one when I graduated from high school. The 8th grade dress was cotton and lace. When it was worn out, I made a pillowcase out of the skirt. I still have the pillowcase and use it sometimes. After we were older and worked, we bought material and made gathered skirts or pleated skirts that we wore to school. Mom was a very good seamstress and could look at a dress in the catalog and try to make our dresses like the pictures. She cut out dresses for Hetty's and Aileen's families too. She also made the boys' shirts out of feed sacks that were appropriate for boys. We also had a jar or a Prince Albert tobacco can for our buttons. No one smoked in our house, but Verge and D. Gouge used tobacco and probably gave us the can. When we killed a chicken, we saved the small, soft feathers for a feather bed and pillows. When we killed a chicken, Mom wrung its neck and laid them on the ground. They flopped around for about 5 minutes and then died. She sometimes chopped their head off, and the boys did that sometimes when they were older. Mom would then put the chicken in boiling water and pulled off all the feathers. The larger ones were thrown away, but the small ones were put in a sack to dry. After they were dried, we stored them until we accumulated enough for a pillow or a cushion. We had to save for several years for enough for a feather bed. Others shared theirs to someone who did not have a feather bed. In the winter, when it was cold, we would sink down in those feather beds and were warm and cozy. you had to be very careful if a child wet the bed. That was not a good situation. The little ones were wearing more diapers, so the bed would not get wet. We did not have box springs on our bed, only open springs. Sometimes a set of springs would fold over and be used on a half bed or cot. One time, we were in a truck and went to Bad Ridge for a memorial meeting. And as we were coming home, we found a set of bed springs that had fallen off a truck. We picked them up and used them for years and years. I sleep in the bed that Mom and Dad started housekeeping in 1929. It is a steel frame and painted gold. Some people had a brass bedstead. They are very valuable if you can find one now. Papa and Grandma had one in their house. He probably had bought it at the trading post in Ramsey. Church services were different than today. At the end, all Christians would go up front and stand and sing. The men were on one side and the women on the other. Sometimes a lady might get happy in the spirit and start to shout. Her husband would come and put his hands on her back under her shoulder blades as she jumped up and down. I remember this with Hamp Vanover and his wife Emma. This didn't occur often, but I remember it a few times. The person who they called on to pray would go up front to the altar and pray for about 15 to 20 minutes. There was always a quartet to sing. Each church had a quartet of their members who visited other churches to sing. Our family of 10 children were home in the block house. I remember Mom taking in washings of 2 families to make it money. Lucille could not remember this, but I did. We caught rain water in barrels and carried water from the spring. I think that one family did not pay, and she quit after 2 times without being paid. I think bleach came out about that time, so she did not have to use lye in hot boiling water anymore. She did not do this but a short time. The block house had an upstairs of only one large room. All of us kids would go up there and sit on the beds and play checkers, Old Maid, or a game of authors. We learned about the old authors and writers such as Tennyson and Longfellow, Mark Twain, and others. This was for competing with other kids. We took losing in stride and did not get mad or fight. As we lay in bed, we played a game of recognizing initials of people who were acquainted with or had heard of. We took turns guessing, and whoever won called out new initials. We had a battery radio during the war, and Dad listened to the news. Later, we had an electric radio and listened to the Grand Ole Opry and some songs. The front porch has a hole left out by a missing block in case anyone needed to crawl under the porch. I remember going under there, and in the pitch black dark, I was scared and didn't go but once. Avery would crawl through and come out and laugh at us girls. There was 2 or 3 feet of drain pipe under the highway below the church in our field. We would crawl through it and come out the other end. It was scary and dark, but we did it anyway. The old public road of many years ago ran between the back of our house and the cemetery. It continued up the road on Olin's land and stopped at Prentice's old house of many years ago, in the 30s or earlier. It was about the width of a wagon. All of us loved to go to school to learn new things. We were all good students. We loved books, but did not have any. Sometimes we had a few comic books, and we would read all of them. We always had a newspaper, and we read it. Dad always subscribed to a paper as far back as I can remember. He read it on a daily basis. He could not always read well, but he did his best. He always read the Bible and could quote many, many verses. A love of learning in school was instilled in all of us kids. We seem to think of learning as a challenge, that we must try to succeed. Mom and Dad looked at our grade cards very casually, or not at all, unless we wanted their signature. I remember signing Dad's name on mine many times, and they didn't see it. I don't remember any encouragement from them or discussion of grades or homework. We did it because we were expected to and did not resent the work. We did not waste any paper or lose pencils, for these were things we cared about. Learning seemed to come easy for all of us, and we completed our assignments on time. Elmer finished the 8th grade, and Eugene the 8th too. Not all boys went to high school in that era of time. Elmer took the GED test, probably in the 1980s, and passed it without any review classes that were being offered locally. He had not been to school in 40 or more years. All of us were very proud of him. He was excellent in math and could figure lumber for a house or building without a calculator. He was a good carpenter and did lots of building and woodworking for family and others. Eugene was good in mechanics and machinery. He had a good memory and could retain details after a long passage of time. Avery always wanted to go to college, but was not encouraged by Mom or Dad. Mom was a quiet person who did not express her feelings or opinions very often. I am sure she was proud of his accomplishments, but did not express her feelings. He was a very successful and brilliant man. All of the girls were good students and were in the top 5% of the class. All of us were very good at spelling. Thelma was a county winner and participated in the Portsmouth Times Spelling Bee. Others were 2nd and 3rd place winners at Garrison and Lewis County. The one-room school did not have time for many subjects. Reading and math were the main ones. Geography was taught too, if there was time. We did not have any maps or globes to study in our classroom and only a few books to share. When you have a large family and hard economic times, you soon learn survival skills to get by each day. There was no outside help from others because everyone we knew was in the same situation as us. There was no government assistance for the widows with families. They had to survive the best way they could and did without lots of necessities in the home. An axe and a good back provided the heat for the winter, and a cross-cut saw was a luxury. Coal was plentiful and cheap if you could afford a ton. Sometimes it had some slate in it and did not burn well. It formed clinker in the bottom of the grates. We had a place where we chopped wood called chopping block. We gathered the chips to burn as well as the wood we chopped. The chopped block was a stump of about 18 inches or 2 feet tall. We would stand our wood up on the block to split it, or lay the split pieces down to split into smaller pieces to fit the cook stove. We had to have very small pieces of wood called kindling to start the fire. We always had a gallon coal oil in a can that sat behind the stove. We poured about half cup on the kindling and then lit a match very carefully, hoping it would create a flame and begin to burn. Our cook stove had a compartment for soot to fall in, and you had to clean it out with a long wire and a piece of steel on the end. Ashes had to be removed out to a different area. You could shovel them out. We put them on the flower beds or in the garden around the plants. Some stoves had a warming place over the stove with 2 doors to keep food warm. We shined the stove with a piece of meat skin. It made it shine and look a little cleaner. Some stoves only had a shelf attached to the back to set items on to stay warm. If there was too many ashes or soot, then the fire did not burn very good and would not put out enough heat. You removed one of the 4 caps to put wood into the stove with a steel gadget about 6 to 8 inches long. Our kitchen had only one cabinet. It had a flour bin on the side that was lined with steel or tin and had a sifter on the bottom. It had 3 drawers, with the bottom one lined with tin and had a lid that covered it. There was a granite or tin piece to roll out the pie crust or cut biscuits on that would wipe clean with a cloth. We were very careful with our plates, bowls, and etc. because we did not have money to replace them. A box of Mother's oatmeal or Quaker oatmeal had some dishes inside, maybe a cup or saucer or a cereal dish. We treasured these and realized they are very valuable now in the antique shops. Rinso wash powders, Octagon, and Clabber Girl baking powder had coupons on the packages. We saved them and redeemed them at the store at Coburn for plates and other dishes. We bought a big bag of puff wheat, and it had 5 to 6 inches of bubble gum inside. We divided the gum among all of us. We didn't buy that often, for we could almost eat a bag at 2 meals. So it was a treat for us. Churning butter was a chore for us. When the fresh milk sits for a day, the cream comes to the top. Mom dipped the cream off and put it in a different crock until she had enough to fill a churn about half full. All the cream was placed in the churn, and we sat it by the fireplace or stove to turn and get warm. If the cream wasn't exactly turned to correct temperature, then the milk would not produce the butter. The job of churning was our job many times. If the milk was exactly right, we could churn with the churn dash in the churn in about 30 minutes. The rich yellow butter would come to the top of the now buttermilk. Mom dipped the butter out of the churn into a bowl. Then she washed it with cold water, and it would hold together in a wad. She washed it 3 to 4 times to get out the buttermilk out of it. Then you add salt, beat it some more until all milk was gone. Then you could mold it in a butter mold to be pretty, or put in a dish to eat, and put in the refrigerator or in a spring or bucket lowered in a well to cool and get firm. We now had buttermilk to drink and use to bake bread. We checked the milk in the churn by leaning it to one side, and if the milk was real thick and clabbered, then it was ready to churn. The churn was a stone crock with a 6 to 8 inches wooden lid that fit tightly in the top of the churn. The dash was a circle of wood with 1-inch holes in it and fastened to a long stick that was about 18 to 24 inches above the churn. Sometimes the bottom of the dash was just 2 to 3 inch wide pieces of wood nailed in from a windmill wheel. Mom used to say that the milk had not turned yet, so it was not ready for us to churn. Later, during the war, we bought some butter in a plastic sealed bag. There was a 1/2 inch round of yellow food coloring in the bag. We pressed the color and it burst, and then we would work the color throughout the butter, which would then turn from white to yellow. We would cut the bag and press the butter into a bowl. It did not have the taste of cow butter, but we ate it if we had nothing else to use. If people wanted to take some butter to a store to sell, you would mold it, and the molds were a 1/2 pound or 1 pound size. There would be a flower on the top to look pretty. The butter would be wrapped in wax paper to take to the store. Our family used lots of butter for our meals. We would use butter and sugar on a biscuit. That was delicious. Some people like to drink clabbered milk. We made it by letting it sit on the cabinet and get thick. We had already taken the cream off the top. It tastes similar to buttermilk. If you tried to churn before the milk or cream turned, then the butter would not form, and if so, only a little. The buttermilk would be very thin and not thick like the good buttermilk. If we had extra milk, then Mom would give it to someone who didn't have a cow. Mom always milked, and later Elmer and Eugene helped her. The milk had to be strained with a milk strainer before putting it in the refrigerators. It would be free of bugs or dirt that may have fallen in it. A cow was almost a necessity of country rural people in that era of time. The neighbors shared milk when someone's cow was dry or not giving milk. Our family drank milk with every meal. Mom also made all of her cake icings out of butter and sugar. It was mixed together, uncooked, and put on a cake that was cold. That is all we knew for icing cakes until we were grown. I remember the first mess of sweet potatoes we gathered in the fall. Mom would cook them and then put them in a pan in the oven to dry out. We put a big pan of them on the table with a bowl of butter, and they soon disappeared with all us kids. They were delicious and still make my mouth water to think of them today. Daddy liked to parch corn. He put an ear of corn in the oven to bake until it was very hard. He liked it, but we kids didn't eat very much of it. He made a square box of screen wire and a wooden handle that held it over the fireplace with corn in it to parch. All houses had screen doors and window screens for the summer heat. We fastened the latch on the screen door, but did not close our big doors at night. Everyone had houseflies. They were very bad. Every so often, Mom would use handheld fly spray and fill it with DDT to kill the flies. We would have to sweep them up and throw them outside. We do not have flies now, as we did many years ago. Even on the farm with cattle, you do not see many houseflies. Mom ironed with old irons that sat on a stove to get hot. She sometimes ironed them before we got up for school because the fire had been very hot to cook breakfast, so the irons were hot. Later, we had an electric iron. We used Argo starch that we cooked and added to the rinse water to starch the clothes. They dried on the clotheslines very stiff, and then we sprinkled them down and rolled them up before we ironed them. They sat and soaked for 2 to 3 hours. We ironed everything, such as dishcloths, underwear, sheets, and other items. Most all items were made from feed sacks and lasted for a long time. Each year, we washed and starched our curtains all over the house. They were lace curtains. We had curtain stretchers that were long 3-inch boards with a lot of nails to hold the curtains on the frame. They dried on the frames and were ready to hang up when they were stiff and dry. If you ran out of vinegar, you borrowed some from the clump of mother vinegar. Mom put it in her jar and added water and sugar, and it sat for a while and became vinegar. I haven't seen any of this mother vinegar since I was very young. We always had a small tree that came from the woods for Christmas. We colored lined paper with crayons and cut each colored line. We made some glue out of flour and paste and pasted the lines into chains to hang on the Christmas tree. We had a few icicles that we hung on the tree also. We had some red and green rope that Dad hung from one corner of the room to the opposite corner. We had a 12-inch paper bell that folded up to store away. We hung it in the middle of the room where the ropes crossed over. Dad always wanted this to stay until after New Year's Day. We stored the rope, bell, and icicles in a box to be used again. We brought these to Kentucky when we moved and used them for a few years, maybe 15. Finally, we bought some decorations after I was grown and in my own home. We nailed a board to the bottom of the tree so it would stand alone. We kids did not talk much about Santa Claus. We didn't get hardly any gifts, so there was no reason to think about him or to expect any gifts. When Elmer worked at Fairfax, he sent us a Christmas present. Lucille and I got a compact, and Mom some washcloths. The others got a small gift too. The church had a Christmas program one year. I remember reciting a poem when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I don't remember other programs at church. Our Our remark to each other at Christmas time was, "Christmas gift." Now we may say, "Merry Christmas" to each other. Our refrigerator was wonderful for us. It was so handy to keep things cold. We had the freezing compartment in the top of the refrigerator. It held about 6 trays of ice. We ate the ice and held it in our hands with a small piece of cloth. Dad bought an ice cream freezer. We bought a mix powder and added milk to it and put in a can in the freezer and added ice and coarse salt around it. We then turned a crank to stir the can of milk, and after 20 or 25 minutes, the milk turned into mushy ice cream. We added peaches to be a different flavor. We took turns turning the handle and crank. It was delicious. We made a taffy candy when we had molasses. We cooked it for a while and then poured it on a platter. It cooled, and we divided it into small pieces, and then we pulled and pulled until it changed colors. We usually had our cousins there to help us. We had a great time eating the taffy. Mom made a dish called You Know. She did not remember how she made it, but we think it was made with some vinegar and other ingredients. Lucille said she remembered it gelled, similar to today's Jell-O. We put potatoes and sweet potatoes in the ashes of the fireplace when hot coals fell through the grates. It took a while for them to bake, but they were very good. We also roasted onions. Our medicine consisted of turpentine, camphor, and camphorated oil. We placed 1/2 teaspoon of turpentine and some sugar to cure a stomach ache. When we ran out of camphor, we balled a solid 1-inch square of camphor and put it in a bottle and added water. After a while, or weeks later, it was camphor. We used for headaches by rubbing it on our head or throat for sore throats. Daddy always used Black Draft, a black powder for constipation, and a bottle of SSS medicine as a blood tonic. We did not brush our teeth until much later. We put baking soda or salt on a piece of rag and rubbed our teeth to clean them. We also used an onion poultice for colds in the chest. We fried the onions and put in a cloth bag and pinned it to our underclothes next to our chest. We smelled for days. It also helped our colds and made me pneumonia. We picked our green beans and used a needle to string them whole on a string from the feed sacks. If you had the sack seam string at the right place, the string would unravel in one long piece. We kept a ball of string in a drawer all the time. We also strung pumpkins, cut in a circle. We hung the beans and pumpkins on nails behind the cook stove. They dried in 2 to 3 weeks, and then they were placed in a 25-pound flour bag to store for the winter. Sometimes we used a feed sack or pillowcase to store them too. We called the beans leather britches. They were delicious. The pumpkins were used to make pies or cooked and put in a dish with sugar and cinnamon. We ate on bread like apple butter. Pumpkins and cushaws were also kept in the dairy too. We gathered some branches from pine trees that had some resin and cones on it to use for kindling to get our fires to start quicker. The resin would burn quick and very hot too. We always kept a slop bucket behind the stove, out of sight to put our scraps from peeling potatoes or cabbage. We added some dishwater and then fed this to our hogs each evening, and they loved this. We also fed them some corn and grown feed called chop. We had to clean our kerosene lamp chimneys often. If the wick wasn't exactly right, it would smoke the chimney that we called lamp globes. The kerosene lamps were very good when you were real close to them and the chimney was clean. Electric lights were placed in the middle of the room with a string to pull it off or on. We were so proud of them. We did not have any wall receptacles. We screwed a thing into the light and shared the outlet with the light bulb and used an extension cord. We would gather honeysuckle flowers to put in a jar for the table. The aroma would make our house smell good. We would cut laurel flowers to use also. Laurel is really a rhododendron bush that grows wild in that area. We would catch lightning bugs and put them in a jar and watch them light up at nighttime. We also tied thread to a June bug's leg and held it on a string and let him fly around. We had lots of fun and competitions too with our bugs. The boys would make stilts out of pieces of wood for us to walk on. We would tie a tin can to our shoes to pretend we were walking on new shoes in another country. We would gather acorns in the fall and put the seed aside for the pigs. We would take the small cap and let it dry and put a hole in the middle of it with a nail. We would put these on a string and it would be our necklaces, and we would wear around the house. We changed from our school clothes into old clothes as soon as we arrived home from school. We wore the same dress 3 or 4 times to school each week before Mom washed them. We did not have many dresses, and we had to take good care of them. Mom ordered some things from Montgomery Ward catalog. She paid a little each month, like our charge accounts today. Dad brought wire from the mines that was discarded after being used for dynamite blasting. The boys twisted the wire, and it was the size needed, and then made or braided watch chains out of it. The boys played lots with marbles and traded with their friends for a particular one or a larger one. They loved the brightly colored ones. They traded at school, and all boys had marbles in their pockets, and a knife too, if they had one. They whittled a lot on sticks and made whistles out of willow sticks or branches. We ate lots of hickory nuts and walnuts in the winter. We kept a rock in the house to use to crack them on. It stayed on the fireplace along with the coal bucket, shovel, and poker for the fire. The fireplace had a mantel above it. It also had a mirror in the middle. We kept our clock sitting on the mantel. Living in the rural areas always had some people who were mentally handicapped. There was a short, heavy-set man named Boone Stanley who visited with certain people. Every month or 2, he would come to our house to stay 2 or 3 nights. Then he would go to another neighbor who lived nearby or up another holler. Boone always had a cane to help him walk. We were good to him, but lots of people wanted to tease him or play tricks on him. Mom's cousin, Bertha Dotson Rose, was his caretaker and took care of buying his clothes. He liked to stay with us, and Mom made him lots of coffee. He filled his cup completely full and then poured some of it in the saucer to cool. He then drank out of the saucer. We kids thought this was funny. We mocked him with our milk in a cup and saucer. Mom told us we should not make fun of Boone. Another man who visited was Howard Stanley. He always rode a horse and would put it in the barn for a day or 2. He could not hear well, and we would have to talk very loud to him. We didn't do any laundry for him. He carried extra clothes in the saddlebags of his horse. He would stay 2 to 3 days and then go up Lick Fork to visit someone else. He lived on Caney Ridge. The last we heard of him was someone had robbed and attacked him. He had head injuries. We do not know what happened to him after we moved to Kentucky. We kids did not pay attention to the odors that came with these 2 men. Mom and Dad never refused to let them stay with us. Howard had a daughter and was not as mentally slow as Boone. He liked to talk to Daddy about farming and mining. Boone inherited some land on Rock House from his parents. Uncle Lester loved to play tricks on Boone, who liked to get a spoon and eat sugar out of the sugar bowl on the table. Uncle Lester put salt in the sugar bowl. Boone took a large spoonful and spit it out so quickly. Uncle Lester just laughed, and this made Boone more upset. He would also tie Boone's coat sleeves together, and this aggravated Boone very much. If Boone was walking along the road, the company bus would stop and give him a ride for free. Boone liked pennies, and if you offered him a quarter or a penny, he would always take the penny, and he was so happy with it. They were characters who were well known and always welcome in our homes. Boone loved to go to church and knew many ministers who were good to him. We kids enjoyed these visits of these men. Dad always kept several hives of bees on the hill behind the house. He had the smoking gear and other things to rob the hives to get the honey. He put the bees to sleep with the smoke of old rags and cut the honey out and placed it in a dishpan. We put the honey in quart jars and stored it for later use to eat with hot biscuits. I don't remember Daddy ever getting stung by the bees. If we kids got stung, Daddy would find 3 different leaves and crush them in his hand and then rub the leaves on the sting. The stinger had to be pulled out first and then the leaves. It worked, and we were all well in a day or so. The bees loved the nectar of the laurel and honeysuckle bushes. We kids played a game by placing 2 chairs about 1.5 feet apart. We spread a cloth over the seats, but put a washpan of water under the cloth. 2 kids sat in the chairs with the cloth stretched out tight. A kid would be called from the other room and told to sit between them on the cloth. Then the 2 kids raised up and the person fell in the washpan full of water. His bottom was wet. This was so much fun. Sometimes one of us developed a wart, and we wanted to get rid of it by the old tales. One remedy was to steal your mama's dish rag and hide it under a rotten stump in the woods. We did this several times, and our warts were cured. I guess the old remedy worked wonders. Grandpa's Papa Trigg owned 50 acres of mineral rights on some land on Rock House. He had owned the rights for many years. It bordered the railroad and would have been easy to get the coal and transport it. The taxes had not been paid on it for many years. Mom and her brothers and sisters paid the back taxes in the 1980s. They were offered $50,000, but her brother, Thurston, thought it was worth more and would not agree. The taxes were paid for another year or so, and then Mom and her family passed away. Nothing ever came with the mineral rights, and in the 90s it was sold for back taxes, and all was lost to lack of pursuing the cause. After we got older, we wanted to curl our hair. We had Prince Albert tobacco cans that Verge gave to us. The boys would cut off the top and the bottom and spread the tin in a flat piece. They would take cutters and cut pieces about 1/4 inch by 5 inches. We wrapped each piece with paper from a flour or sugar bag. We then rolled our hair and bent the ends back so they would stay firm and make our hair curly. Also, a section of the hair could be wrapped with a long string of cloth about 1 inch wide. The next morning, the strings were removed and the hair would hang in long curls. The curls were not combed again, but left in those long curls. Later, when we were in high school, we used bobby pins and rolled the hair in a small circle and put a bobby pin to hold it until it dried. We slept in the pin curls. We put a scarf around our heads so the pins would not hurt our heads as we slept or not fall out during the night. Girls need to look pretty. I did not know anyone who went to beauty shops to get a perm until I was married. Money was not available for unnecessary things. We did not go to town at all until we went to Clintwood to 7th grade and to high school. Mom rode the bus when she went to Norton to have her teeth pulled and got dentures. We did not go to the dentist at all in our young years. Dad pulled our teeth, and we did not take very good care of them. We washed our hair with hand soap or lye soap because we did not have shampoo. We used our towels until they were threadbare and full of holes. We used rags for wash rags. We did not know that nice things were available, but if we did, we knew we could not have any of them. I remember that we thought one of our female teachers ordered her husband out of a catalog. We saw pictures of people in the catalog, and I guess we thought they were for sale too. The older kids probably wanted us to think that so they could tease us about it. Papa Trigg married Mrs. Rosa Weisenhunt after Grandma was killed in a car accident. She had several children at home. They moved in with Papa at his house. The youngest was Ruby. She wore her hair in braids to school. She did not undo the braids nightly and wore them for several days. We told her that her hair had mildewed along with sweat in the summer. I don't know if this was true, but we thought so in our young minds. In about 1946, a truck went over the hill at Trigg Bend and rolled to the bottom. Dad and the boys went to see what happened and found 2 men dead. They loaded them on the back of the pickup truck to take them to the hospital. The police investigated and said they should not have been moved. But Dad and the boys were not sure of their condition, dead or alive, so they did what they thought was best. They carried them from the bottom of the hill to the top. We did not hear any bad language from our parents. Dad sometimes got aggravated at an old horse and may have said a word or two. Mom did not use the words, "shut up," or "I'm going to tell your dad," or any other phrases on us children. When the little ones messed their diapers, she called it "gommed their diaper." We did not hear any other words that did not sound proper. She used the words "gommed up the house" when the house was messed up. Mom did not say a bad word or a word about the character of any other person. I don't know about her thoughts, but the words did not come from her lips. She did the work and did not complain about not having things or certain foods to cook. She took her plight in life as a stoic and accepted her role as wife and mother. She did not use any words of praise or outwardly show love to the kids. But we accepted that and continued on with our lives. We knew she loved us by the way she worked hard to prepare food to feed us and to care for us. She seldom talked about her young years, so we do not know much about her earlier life. She commented on the hard work she had to do to help the family. Mom loved to visit with her family, but did not get too many opportunities because they had moved away, and so did we. She loved to go to Lucille's because that was home for her. Mom did not spank any of us children, seldom, ever. She just said, "Don't do that," and we obeyed her. I saw her mad one day when our cat was in the house under the bed and had made a mess. She pulled the bed from the wall, grabbed the cat, and put its nose in the mess it made. The cat screamed and jumped out of her hands, and it didn't come back in the house anymore. Mom continued cleaning with the broom and mop and was happy again. Mom used correct English, and I don't remember her using the word "ain't." When Dad was in the hospital, she referred to him as her husband and not as the old man. She attended Lick Fork School that we attended. She probably went to school to about 4th or 5th grade. She didn't do any writing over the years. Dad always went to the grocery store and picked up groceries. During the last few years, we girls took her to the grocery store and helped her buy groceries. We also carried them into the house and helped her put them away in the cabinets. After she had a freezer, lots of food was frozen, but she still tried to can anything that grew in the garden. She loved mustard greens and always froze those. She cooked them and then fried them. Everyone loved them. Mom put on her clothes for the day as soon as she got out of bed. She did not lounge around in robes or housecoats. If she owned any house shoes, she may have worn those in the early morning. We never did see her in her slip or Dad in his underwear. We girls wore slips and called them princess slips and called our underwear step-ins. All slips and underwear were made of feed sacks and some elastic or piece of old inner tube cut into 1/4-inch to 1/2-inch strips. Elastic was scarce during the war, and you had to use whatever you had. Another time, a truck wrecked at the Trigg Bend and lost some of its items. All of the items were not picked up, and some cheese was found by Aunt Helen and Uncle Thurston. We had never eaten cheese, and they asked Eugene if he liked it. He said, "I don't know, but if you will give me some, and I will take a bite, then I will tell you." We got our first taste of cheese at that time. Another time, a big pop truck wrecked, and the men gave us some orange pop. We sure did enjoy those drinks. Norma liked to rock in her little rocking chair and sing. She sang, "The sawmill went in and the sawmill went out," over and over again. Another song was, "Clarence Mullins, a grown man, is my sweetheart." We tried to teach her church songs, but she was stuck on those when she was very small. Our school had some yellow-back songbooks that we sometimes sang from in our seats. The songs we knew were "Carry Me Back to Old Virginia," "My Bonnie on the Ocean," "Reuben and Rachel," "John Brown's Body," and ballads. We also learned 2 or 3 Christmas songs. We wore galoshes to school and long cotton socks with a garter to hold them up. The boys wore rubber overshoes that had a fastener to snap them closed. We did not have gloves, but had a headscarf to cover our head and tied it under our chin. A few years later, men's pants of denim or overall material were made with a section in the middle of the back to the top of the pants containing a section with eyelet holes. We laced a white shoestring, as we laced a shoe, and tied it at the top in a bow. They were popular for a while, and then the style changed. This was styled after the pants of the sailors during World War II. During World War II, the government issued a book of ration stamps to all citizens of USA. A book was issued to each adult and child. Stamps were used for shoes, gas, kerosene, food, etc. Our teacher wanted a stamp for shoes, and Mom gave her one. You were not allowed to tear a stamp out before the purchase, but you could attach a stamp to a Sears order blank and order shoes or other items. I don't know if we used all of ours because we didn't have much extra money. The stamps were used for 4 years. Our teacher sold war stamps at school for 15 cents and put them in a book. We did not buy any, for we did not have any extra money, and she did not sell very many. The rules for ration stamps were very strict and posed a large fine if disobeyed. We did not hear too much about the war. We did not pay too much attention to the nightly news or no large newspaper. Dad's brother, Fleetwood, was in the Army, and Mom's brother, Thurston. Fleetwood was injured and suffered emotionally for years. Thurston came home uninjured. we saw our first airplanes pass over the area. That was of great interest to us. We were far away from the war, as we thought, for we did not hear much about it or see any men in uniforms. Our school collected milk pods from milkweed growing in our area. We gathered them in a poke and took them to school. They were then sent to a center where they were processed. We were told the insides were used for making parachutes. I don't have my thoughts and ideas in a complete and orderly manner, so I may have a story or a paragraph out of context. I want to add this to hog killing time. We had to wait until very cold weather to kill our hog. It had to be done away from the house. We had to have hot water and very sharp knives. Someone had to shoot the hog and then stick a knife in its throat so it would bleed. Then it would be placed in the boiling water pan so the hair could be scraped off easily. Next, it would be hoisted up in the air and hung on a tree limb by its legs that had a stick stuck through its front legs. Maybe some large boards were standing in the air and braced by other boards. Using a sharp knife, it was gutted out and drained of all its blood, followed by being taken down and cut into large pieces or sections. These were cut into smaller pieces, and the fat cut off and put in a pan to boil slowly and become rendered lard. Some fat and shoulders were ground into sausage. Mom canned some sausage for later use. We put lots of salt on the sides of bacon so it would not spoil. I remember the hams hung on a wire and then under the floor until we used them. The head, ears, and feet were cooked and the meat picked off to make head sauce. Dad had a staff and last to repair our shoes. He had some leather. I don't know how he acquired it, or if it was the skin of an animal that he and the boys had treated and saved for using on shoes. The old shoes were kept, and leather or soles may have been reused. We did not remember. The last were like a shoe, small, medium, and large. The correct size was placed inside the shoes, and then the shoe was repaired. He used small tacks that wasn't too long to go completely through the shoe and hurt your foot. The tacks would hit the steel last and bend it a little too long. We placed cardboard inside to make our shoes fit better. If our socks had holes in the heels, we would put the heel into the shoe so the hole could not be seen. The staff was a tall steel, about 24 to 28 inches tall, that would stand alone on the floor. The last would fit directly on the top of the staff and fit perfectly and would not fall off. Sometimes a steel heel tap, about 1 inch size, was nailed to the outside edge of the heel of the shoe so that the heel could not be worn off. The kids that had heel tops would drag the heel on a smooth floor and make a clicking sound. We don't hardly ever see any today. Later, Avery would buy an expensive pair of shoes, and the sole would be thin from wear, and he would have them resoled. The upper leather shoes were still in good condition. I haven't seen a shoe repair shop in many years. I went to Louisville in April 2015 and saw one on the street downtown. We wore galoshes over our shoes in the winter. The boys had rubber Arctic overshoes that had a buckle-like fastener and came almost to the knee. We would pull our boots off when we arrived at school and put them on when we left school. We went through lots of mud and water. Dad made an axe, hoe, and tool handles out of a hickory or oak piece of wood. He made them very smooth and used a knife or sandpaper to make them very smooth. He sharpened all the tools so they would cut quickly. I think he used a file to sharpen them or used a stone whetstone. Aunt Sylvia was wife of James Rowland Lambert, Raleigh. James Rowland was a brother of Creed Stanley's mother, Mary Melissa Lambert. Dad was very close to Aunt Sylvia and her children. James Rowland, Sylvia's husband, was born January 22nd, 1876, and died February 13th, 1926. Melissa Lambert, Dad's mom, was born August 3rd, 1878, and died January 1st, 1939. Solomon Lambert, Dad's uncle, was born June 11th, 1888, and died March 24th, 1975. Solomon married Belle Lawson. Dad didn't talk much about Raleigh, Aunt Sylvia's husband, but he cared about her and the girls, Ruth Lambert Browning, Edith Lambert, and Ava Rose. They all lived on the home place on Honey Camp, almost to the end of the road. The house had an upstairs, and Aunt Sylvia's beds were almost as tall as the ceilings of the house. We were small, but Mom and Dad let us go to visit on a Saturday and stay all night. We four oldest of the children would walk to Darwin and then up to Honey Camp Road. We did not see any traffic. It was probably 3 miles each way. Aunt Sylvia was very old and had a tremor in her hands and speech. She would cook canned corn and potatoes for us. Our mom did not can corn, but we really liked it. She had small banty chickens, which we liked to watch in the yard and gather the tiny eggs. Edith lived with her since she never married, but later had a daughter. We were there during the war, and Aunt Sylvia's son, Ted, was in the Army. She grew a garden and canned her vegetables. She must have had a small check, or she could not have survived. Ruth married a Browning, and he died. They had 3 children, Nina, Nona, and Roland. Ava was Aunt Sylvia's daughter, and she married Charles Rose and lived next door and had 5 children. Ruth lived on the hill above Uncle Solomon's house. She was trying to raise her 3 children alone and had some rough times. She crocheted all kinds of scarves and other things to help feed her children. She had a large field cleared around her house and had a cow for milk, a garden, and chickens. Ruth Lambert Browning, born 1899 and died September 10th, 2000. Ted Lambert was born October 1st, 1903, and died February 22nd, 1942. Dennis Earl Lambert was born April 17th, 1913, and died August 18th, 2001. Lucy Edith Lambert was born May 26, 1915. Ava B. Lambert was born May 9, 1918, and died March 26, 2001. Listed above are Aunt Sylvia's children. Grandma Melissa Stanley had a brother named Solomon Lambert. We called him Uncle Solly. He and his wife, Belle, lived on Honey Camp on the farm adjoining Aunt Sylvia. Their house is still standing today. They had 2 great big floor clocks in their bedroom. We kids loved to hear them chime every half hour and ring on the hour. We had never seen clocks like those, and we were fascinated by them. Aunt Belle was a big woman and very kind to all of us. We would stay all night with them. They had a spring close to their house. It was sulfur water and did not taste very good to us. Aunt Belle cooked with it, and they were used to it. They had a big dried gourd that they used for a dipper to dip the water into the buckets. It held about a quart. The buckets had turned yellowish brown from the sulfur. They did not have any electric during this time. Aunt Belle enjoyed going to church and attending church in the school building. Uncle Solly would sit on the front porch in a rocking chair. He always had a fly swatter in his hand killing flies. He and Aunt Belle seemed very devoted to each other. They were very kind and generous to us. Their yard was so full of rocks that you could not have mowed the grass as we do today. The rocks were large and deep in the ground. They had a coal house beside the road for the coal to be dry in the winter. They had a cow, and she may have grazed in the yard. Uncle Solly must have been in World War I and drew a small pension because he did not have a job. He did not smoke or chew tobacco. Clinchfield Cole came to that area and purchased his house and also Dad's cousin's house, Ruth Browning, who lived on the hill above Uncle Solly. These people lived very simple lives. They did not go to town shopping or even to the grocery store very often. They raised a garden and canned their vegetables and fruit and always seemed satisfied in their lives. They put their canned fruit in a cellar under the house. The name for a cellar back then was a dairy. We did not call it a cellar until we moved to Kentucky. Uncle Solly and Aunt Belle adopted a daughter after we moved to Kentucky, and she took care of them in their old age. After they sold the property on Honey Camp, they moved to Caney Ridge until their deaths. Uncle Solly died March 24th, 1975, and Aunt Belle at a later time. They are buried in Lawson Cemetery on Caney Ridge. We kids were so happy to visit these old people. They were the only ones we were overnight visitors for. Edith had 8 to 10 pairs of shoes, and we had never seen anyone with so many shoes. Our mom usually had old work shoes and a black pair that laced and a small black heel. They were shoes all really old people wore. Edith had some jewelry, which we had never seen anyone have at our home or in our family. When I was in the 4th grade, I wanted to go and stay with Ruth and her children. Mom and Dad agreed, and I enrolled in Honey Camp School. I stayed for about 2 months, I think, and then I came home. I returned to Lick Fork School. Lester Milton and Una Dotson. Lester was born March 26, 1905, and died January 12, 1961. Una was born September 16, 1908, and died October 23, 2005. Lester was the oldest son born to Trigg and Amanda Dotson. Una was born to Thompson and Boggs of Bold Camp up Birchfield Road, close to Pound, Virginia. She was reared in that area and went to Baltimore, Maryland to work in the shipyards during World War II. She and Lester met because he was working in that area and staying with Johnny Beverly's family. They met and married. Lester was about 32 years old and Una was 35 years old. When the shipyard closed down, they returned and bought Hetty's house, and they lived the rest of their lives there. Lester drove coal trucks until he passed in January 1961, and Una worked as housekeeper for people after his death. I talked with Aunt Una one day at Lucille Hale's kitchen table when she was 94 years old. This was 3 years before she died. Una said Lester was 32 and she was 35 when they got married. She said she wanted to work and went with her niece and nephew to work in the shipyards in Maryland. She had heard of Dotson's, but had never met Lester. She had missing teeth, but would snicker and grin as she talked about him. She said that Lester's mom was killed in a car accident in October of 1943 and that he was ready to get married. They were married by the Justice of the Peace, with Johnny Beverly and his wife, May, as witnesses. She just snickered and giggled as she thought of these memories. They were both working night shift in 1944 when they were married in Baltimore, Maryland. Anita Dotson, Olin's daughter, asked Una if she went on a honeymoon or a wedding trip, and she said, "We both went to work that night." The government provided housing for them, but they boarded with the Beverlys. They continued until after the war was over, and they came home and bought Hetty Slemp's house. I said to Una, "We chose good husbands, didn't we, Una?" She replied, "Wasn't Don good to you and Lester was good to me?" She said again, "Yes, we made good choices in our men." Her mother always told her, "You had better watch where you jump and pick carefully and also where you land." Again, Una said, "Choosing a man or a mate is very hard, but you have to wait on them and take care of them." She told me she had waited on Lester until he died. He always called her widow woman, and she said he always did so with love and affection until he died. Lester drove a coal truck. He had leukemia when he died. Lester was very good to his brother Thurston's girls, Lois, Wilma, and Fran. He teased them a lot, and they loved him. We saw Aunt Una when we visited Lucille over the years. She was very conservative and did not spend much money on groceries. She worked for people doing house and yard work, especially for Bill and Zona Powers. Zona gave her clothing and food. Una had chickens and sold eggs to Lucille and others. She sold extra vegetables that she raised, also dried beans for other people. She sold extra chickens when they were too old to lay. She also gathered wild greens, recognizing all that were edible. She had a cow in her younger days and sold milk and butter. Una was very odd, wearing old dresses over old patch pants, or sometimes men's pants. She would put a paper bag on her head for a hat in the summer. She never left home or went to town except once a month for groceries. She would buy only necessities: flour, meal, sugar, pure lard, and milk. She canned everything she could grow. Her cellar was full of canned goods, some being very old and unfit to consume. Her cellar was under her house with shelves in the dugout area. I think Lester built it for her. She would walk along the railroad, gathering up coal that fell off the trains. Sometimes it would not burn very well because it would be slate, which did not burn. Lucille would take Una to memorial meetings on the hill each year. Her relatives seldom visited her until she became very old and not in good health. Her niece came the last few years and brought her groceries out of the money which Una had in a safety deposit box at the bank. She had war bonds from the 40s, which were never cashed until her later years. She had quite a sum of money in a bank account at 2 or 3 banks. Her family inherited all of this after her death. Una became very ill and had to go to a nursing home and passed away there. She was at a home in Wise. We visited her often, and Lucille visited her several times each year. She would save some food she didn't eat and put it in a drawer for later. It would spoil, and the nurses would discard it. She looked so clean at the home because she had regular baths and lotions on her skin. Her relatives visited her regularly after being in the nursing home. Una knew Ralph Stanley's mother and told us stories about her. Una is buried beside Lester in the Dotson Cemetery at the church. She was cared for by the Pound Funeral Home. Steve Hale purchased her place, and she left the land to Lester's heirs. We each received $80 or $90 as our share. The amounts varied to the number of children of Ernie, Olin, Ursie, Hetty, and Thurston. Una said her dad made caskets for the neighbors when the people died at home. They used white materials inside and black outside, and they used tacks to hold the materials. They did not embalm bodies, so they buried them the next day. They kept them at home and sat up all night. They did not use undertakers until later years. They had a thin piece of material to use as a veil over the casket to keep flies off the body. The family and friends dug the graves and had the body at the house. They did not have vaults in the grave until much years later. Una talked about the women always wore dark dresses and bonnets to church on Bold Camp where she lived. The men had an elastic band around their shirt sleeves above their elbow. I do not know why the old regular Baptists use line singing even to this day. They had 2 or 3 preachers at each service. They hung their hats on nails on the wall. Coal business brought prosperity and jobs to that area after World War II and during the war to some extent. When Lick Fork Mines opened, it helped the area and people have better lives and a better economy. We who knew Aunt Una will never forget her. We loved her and looked at her house as we pass and think that it was a blessing to have known such a fine lady. I have tried to capture some of the scenes of my earliest years in Horseshoe. All of you have been very patient, waiting for me to finish this phase of my life, but I will begin on my Kentucky life in Garrison and continue my married life. God has let me live to see 5 great-grandchildren. I still have the desire to live on and on as long as I can be physically active and mentally active. When the time comes that I am no longer here no more, there will be a better home waiting for me above, where so many dear family and friends have already gone. But I still love to see all my family, who are the future generations, as often as I can. These writings may help the younger ones to see and appreciate the portion of their mountain heritage and leave a better heritage to those who follow them. So I will say farewell to these ramblings of words of the past, but I still have my memories and look to the future and what it may bring. I pray that our families and leaders may look to God for His leadership and guidance, for without His guidance, they cannot be sure they are leading all right in this difficult and challenging age. Nothing is worthless because it is old. Neither are all things valuable because they are new. But some things are worthy of following today or any time are good character, high ideals, thrift, good work ethic, and the ability to accept our lives as it is and to make of it the best we can and leave the world better for future generations because we have lived. Memories are the thoughts that make up our lives and maybe the eyes of our soul. May God bless all of you. Clara Ruth Stanley, January 2018.